What is the situation on the ground with the Russia-Ukraine war on its seventh day? Who is having the upper hand? Where is the war going? Two military experts will share their observation and opinion. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Win and Cathy show. Today, it will be myself, since Wei is still on the way back into San Francisco. So the Russia-Ukraine war has entered its seventh day. Russia has not accomplished its original goal of quick victory, even though it commands a military that is 5 to 10 times stronger than that of Ukraine. As of now, we know that Ukraine has not lost any large city. The only city it has lost is the medium-sized one called Kherson in the south, with a population closer to 300,000 people. However, all major Ukrainian cities are either under siege or face fierce bombardment. At this point, there is an intense battle around Kharkiv, the largest city in the east, and a 50-mile military convoy moving towards Ukraine capital Kyiv. Thousands of people, both soldiers and civilians, have perished in the war, and this is the first major war in Europe after World War II. So what is the situation on the ground right now? Who is having the upper hand? Would Ukraine be able to hold or not? So where the war is going. Tonight, I will have two special guests who are military experts to share their observation and opinion with you. Our first guest is retired Colonel John Mills. He is the former Director of Cybersecurity Policy, Strategy, and International Affairs at the Department of Defense. Colonel Mills is a national security professional with service in 5 eras: Cold War, Peace Dividend, War on Terror, World in Chaos, and now Great Power Competition. He is currently a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. And then our second guest, retired Lieutenant Colonel Young Mabry. He served in the U.S. Air Force for 28 years, from 1979 to 2007. Then he retired and returned to Arizona, where he was born and raised as a farmer. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Mabry is running for the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Arizona's 6th district. So first of all, I ask retired Colonel John Mills, how does he read the situation as of today?
Yeah, Cathy, it's still not clear in a lot of ways. Again, we're approximately at almost day 6, day 7 of this operation. Still, although Kiev was only roughly 50 miles from the border, they still, with Belarus, Russian and I believe Belarus has essentially been told to participate. They still have not achieved a complete encirclement or even a decisive approach to the city. So puzzling a bit here. This is not a rapid advance due to the lack of air power on the Ukrainian side. This would be horrifically bad because of all the what we would call column formation, where essentially all the tanks, artillery, and trucks are essentially on roads in a linear fashion, which is that's called a lunch or a good target. And so is it supply problems? It's unclear. But also what's also baffling as with the absence of the Ukrainian, which they only have about 90 what we would call fighter jets. The Russians, who supposedly have a lot more, their absence has been quite puzzling and confusing. This is, that was supposed to be one of the decisive advantages of the Russian force was their air force, and according to a lot of reports, it really has not been decisively present. So a little bit of a confusing situation. Why haven't the air forces of both sides been decisively engaged? The reporting still is a bit spotty on this, but it's very, very unclear. And again, the Russian columns, they are very vulnerable as they stand. There have been some strikes against them with drones, most likely armed drones, most likely received from Turkey. The United States still has a lot of controls over who gets armed drones. I believe Taiwan has received armed drones. There's just a handful of countries that receive the armed drone variants. So very unclear what's going on. It's very I mean, there has been violence, there has been contact, there has been deaths on both sides, probably in the thousands. But it's very puzzling what's going on.
Right. So just as Colonel Mills mentioned, that there are 40 miles along of a Russian column leading up to Kiev, but it's just kind of stayed there. So what's really going on with this column?
So I think we can kind of see, and we can see deep and see not just the initial columns, but also behind what's going on. We're also hearing a little bit about some infighting. Gerasimov, the senior, essentially that would be our General Milley equivalent. General Gerasimov, there's potentially some friction between him and Putin.
So what kind of infight between Putin and General Gerasimov?
Well, I mean, I think in some ways they're not happy. The Russian military has been underfunded for years and is nothing like what it used to be as far as size. But even back when it was big, the Russians were very sloppy on maintenance and logistics. That was what happened in Afghanistan. It was pretty aggressive. They pushed in, but they were very challenged to logistically sustain their forces in Afghanistan. Same thing has happened in Syria. The Russians, although they were trying to throw all their weight and support in with the Assad regime, they just were constantly struggling to logistically resupply the actual Soviet, Russian, forces in Syria and their Syrian allies. So continual challenge and lack of art form on the Russian side for logistic sustainment. If Putin tried to move to replace Gerasimov, I don't think that would turn out well for Putin. And because Gerasimov, I think, would have the strong support of the armed forces. This slow motion war, minus an air force on both sides, is very puzzling. There definitely is conflict, but the Russian columns seem to be undersupplied. There almost seems to be more activity in toward Kharkov, to the east, and that's where Russian forces have come down from Kursk and other places where they've assembled. And there almost seems to be more activity and fighting near Kharkov. But this is beginning to look like what the Donbass region, Luhansk and Donetsk, have looked like for years. Has been essentially a stalemate and a standoff with neither side being able to achieve real dominance. So in the south, some forces have pushed up from Crimea, and a lot of that was to secure fresh water and drinking water. But I think in many ways, and this is also reminding me of Bosnia. This reminded me a lot of Bosnia in where I was at for a year. The Bosnia was the Serb side, which was supported by the Russians, really didn't have enough force structure. They were heavily armed, but there just wasn't enough of them to decisively move, and seize terrain against the Bosnian population. Was larger, but less well armed, and it was really it developed rapidly into a stalemate, and that's essentially what we're seeing now, with little raids from the occupied enclaves, but by Russian forces. But I think in many ways the maneuver element of this conflict is kind of, essentially the stalemate, and the lines of control and zones of separation are essentially being established. I'm not sure how much further the Russians are going to be able to push.
Then on the Ukraine side, if in terms of the 40 miles long of the Russian column, the convoy, if Ukraine is able to use the Air Force, it will be a natural, seems very, it will make sense just for the Ukraine to use the Air Force to attack the column. It will be very effective. So why Ukraine is not using the Air Force? So I asked Colonel John Mills to explain a little bit more.
They only have roughly 90 fighters. I don't know how many survived the initial strikes. The Russians are smart enough that they probably, in their initial strikes last Wednesday, essentially we're day 7, but last Wednesday, probably that was one of the first things that they did, was go after those 90 aircraft on the runway. I don't really have a good number of how many survived. I mean, the Russians were normally pretty good about building what we call hardened aircraft shelters, so that when the aircraft's on the ground, it's inside a concrete reinforced building, so it can't be easily strafed or bombed or destroyed. So I don't know how many of those Ukrainian roughly 90 fighters survived the first night. I'm sure they were dispersed, meaning instead of keeping them all at a major base, that they would send them out to smaller airfields. Some of these aircraft, like the MiG-29, which is an advanced aircraft, I don't know how good that is for direct air support and conducting an attack on a column of tanks, which is how the Russians are essentially are on the roads right now. So I don't know how much of the ordnance, that means bombs, that the Ukrainians have, so they could drop bombs. I just don't know, what was their provision of ordnance and bombs, because that's also another target, is where you store those bombs is also a target. So, the reporting is not good on this so far, as far as some of these basic questions.
So on the Russian side, why is the slow motion war? What does that tell about Russia?
I just don't know if the Russians have yet achieved enough force with that is supported with food, water, fuel, ammunition, that they're able to really it does not appear now. Some Russian propagandists have said that Kiev is cut off and surrounded. I think that's a bit of a stretch. It seems like there is definitely from the north, maybe some from the east, some Russian forces, but I don't think they've achieved if this is encirclement of Kiev, it's not working out well for the Russians.
So the West has committed to provide military aids to Ukraine, including $350 million from the United States. But should the Russians encircle Kiev, would that prevent the West's aid, including weapons and ammo, from reaching Kiev? is encircling an effective strategy?
They're spending a lot of their military army force on surrounding Kiev, and they haven't done that yet. So Ukraine is a fairly large country. It's the second largest in Europe outside of Russia itself. So there's still a lot of terrain that the Russians have not occupied yet. So there's still a lot of free Ukraine. And so even if they encircle Ukraine, there'd be a lot of terrain where the Ukrainians can be resupplied, can organize, and resist.
So Putin said that they have put their strategic nuclear force on alert, and the Russian foreign minister said that the Third World War will be nuclear. So what do you make of it?
That's a very concerning development. This is something I think I've mentioned before, that we've, both on our side and on the Russian side, there was a much larger stockage of nuclear bombs and missiles, but the training and readiness levels were much higher. So right now, it's a bit rusty on both the Russian side and the American side, but him saying that is very concerning. I think it's also, that reflects their frustration with their conventional ground force, and it's not been successful so far. So this is very, very concerning that he would elevate it to nuclear. Also, receiving reports in Kharkiv, use of Russian paratroopers. So seems to be more fighting in Kharkov, but I think the paratroopers means that they're trying to reinforce success there, and because they have a limited number of troops that are trained to jump out and parachute from airplanes, and it's usually considered kind of their elite forces. They're very effective, but they have to be resupplied quickly, or they will be out of food and gas and ammunition real quick.
So Colonel John Mills basically saying that this war is really turning into a stalemate, and it's entering into the seventh day. But for the last 5 days, the Russians have not really made much progress. For the last 5 days, basically they're sitting in the column, and he emphasized that. The logistics is really important in the war, and the Russians are not good at it. And he said that really reminds him of a lot of what happened to Bosnia. So now let's turn to our second guest, Lieutenant Colonel Young Mabry. As I introduced him before, he served in the U.S. Air Force for 28 years, and now returned to Arizona as a farmer, but he is stepping out to run for Congress to represent the 6th District of Arizona. So in regards to the strategy of Russian might just encircle Kiev to potentially block the West's military aid to Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Mabry said, he replied this actually to me in writing first, said the most effective strategy would be for the Russians to cut off what in the military they called the ground avenues of approach into Kiev. The avenues of approach would be the roads that enter Kiev. If the Russians cut off the ground avenues of approach, that would prevent the intended aid from reaching Kiev. However, Lieutenant Colonel Mabry does not think it would be practical for the Russians to totally surround Kiev. On the other hand, if Kiev was cut off like this, he thinks that the city would be under siege, captured. That would place Ukraine in a very difficult situation. However, Lieutenant Colonel Mabry said that the Ukrainians would establish another hub or city to conduct their defensive actions against the Russians. The other city or hub would likely be further west in the country of Ukraine. Transportation aircraft would be used to deliver supplies into a city or area that Russia does not have the control. There would have to be some pretty good airfields to do that. He thinks that. So Lieutenant Colonel Mabry said he's not familiar with the infrastructures of Ukraine or what other cities could be used as a staging area to resupply their war efforts against Russia. As a military planner, he would look for such a resupply area rather than just surrender because the capital city were to be captured. Doing this would suppose that the Ukrainian leadership is still intact and not killed or captured. So, in terms of why the Ukraine Air Force has not attacked the Russian column, Lieutenant Colonel Mabry said that appears that the Russians have taken away Ukrainians' air superiority. So then I asked him which side appears to have the upper hand right now.
I think the Russians clearly have the upper hand militarily. It appears to me that they denied the Ukrainians to gain air superiority, which is, as you pointed out, that big long column of tanks and stuff going through their country, and it's not being attacked at all by air. So the Russians have eliminated Ukrainian capability to defend themselves by air. So the Russians, they know they have good tactics and strategies to be able to do that kind of thing. They're a formidable military foe, but it really appears to me that Putin has miscalculated his popularity in the world and in his own country is very, very damaged and very low. And I think he has miscalculated the will of the Ukrainians that they, like I say, Zelensky is not wanting a ride, he wants ammo. And the rest of the people in the country are of the same mind.
So I asked Lieutenant Colonel Mabry to elaborate on how he sees the will of the people in Ukraine in this war.
I was really encouraged. There were two members of parliament in the Ukraine who pointed out that they're prepared. One guy, I don't know his name, but was saying he knows that he's likely going to be a target for the Russians to kill. But he held up his AK-47 and he said, "I'm ready for him." And then I saw another member of parliament do the same thing. The point I'm making here is that the Ukrainians have armed themselves such that when the Russians come across, they're talking the civilians are ready to fight. And I'm encouraged to see that Ukraine is not willing to just run away, but they're ready to fight, and they're willing to fight, and they don't want to have another country necessarily come in and fight their wars for them. What they want is the capability, the armaments, the ammunition. For example, I thought it was insightful when Biden ordered Zelensky a ride out, to get away from his country. And from what I understand, his comment was, "I don't want to ride, I want ammo." In other words, he is going to stay there at the front of his country and fight to the end to defend his country. And the people, they're making Molotov cocktails, they're doing whatever they can to defend their country. Now, my brother, you met him, Cathy. Remember my brother Ralph? He lived in and served in Ukraine on a medical type mission for a year and a half a few years ago. So he knows firsthand what the Ukrainians are like. And the Ukrainians have had all they can handle when it comes to Soviet-like dictator oppression. They're done with it. And they've been there, done that. They are not willing to do that again. And that seems to be the reason why they're so strong in their willingness to fight, lay down their lives if they have to defend their land, their families, and their freedoms. And I am really proud of the Ukrainians. We, then the rest of the world community, need to stand up and help them repel the Russian invasion. It appears too that I've seen on news reports that Putin is losing the informational battle. Like I say, there's the elements of power that a country has. One of them is informational power, and that is that Putin has put himself at odds with the world, and the informational part of the elements of power of other countries is showing that Putin is losing face, and he is losing any kind of support that he might have had from any other countries by doing what he's done. It's not acceptable in the world community for him to do that.
So, in order to win the war, which is more important, military capability or will of the people?
You got to have the will of the people, and I think back, and what I understand, the people from Poland, they in World War II, they attacked columns of tanks with their horses and stuff like that. They had the will to defend their country, but they didn't have the means to do it, and so they were obliterated. With the will that the Ukrainians have and the equipment that President Trump, again, like I said, I believe it was sold probably through foreign military sales, that sold to the Ukrainians years ago, they do have a degree of capability to defend themselves. But we can't, again, as a world community, can't sit back and expect that, by analogy, that the Ukrainians are going to be able to fight off the Russian tanks with horse cavalry. You see what I'm saying? I mean, we need to make sure that they have the armament to do it.
So I asked Lieutenant Colonel Mabry, where does he see the war is going?
The fact that it is taking Russia, that supposedly has such a superior military force, so long to get from the border to Kiev, or Kiev, however you want to pronounce it, is indicative of the two things that we've talked about. Weakness in the Russian ability to, their logistics ability and strength of the Ukrainians to withstand an invasion. The longer it takes the Russians and it appears that their objective is to capture Kiev, the longer it takes for them to meet that objective, the worse they're going to look, the more bad press, if I could call it that, negative information or negative attitude towards Russia, the less Putin will be. He is in bad shape right now. His popularity levels are very low, and the longer it takes, and if he continues to do this kind of thing, his popularity will continue to be eroded, and that's a good thing for the world community and also for Ukraine. He needs to realize that he's made a huge blunder, unacceptable, and again, I would hope that the Ukrainians continue to show resistance, and basically, it would like to see Putin leave with, as we say, with his tail between his legs, and go back home and realize he can't do that kind of stuff again. As it continues, or if it continues, I believe that the world community, the United States being the world leader, needs to step up and be strong and use those other elements of national power, economic sanctions. Again, I don't have a great deal of faith in the United Nations these days, but the United Nations needs to step up. As they were set up after World War II with the idea to prevent the catastrophe that World War II was for the world, and get people to the negotiating tables, and realize that in today's world, you simply just don't go invade a neighboring country just because you can, like Russia did. So again, I think the world community, the United States in particular, the European Union, and with the capabilities of NATO, need to continue to exert those other elements of national power against Russia to let them know that this is not an acceptable behavior.
So, what's a takeaway that Lieutenant Colonel maybe would like to share with our audience?
To understand the value of the right to keep and bear arms. You know, tyranny never goes away. And we've got to understand in the foundation of our country that our Revolutionary War was fought against the tyranny of the British Crown back in those days. And that is the reason that we have our Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments of our Constitution. And the Second Amendment, as we know, and it is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The ultimate way that we defend ourselves is that we, the people, have the right to keep and bear arms. And we're seeing how that plays out in real life, in real time, over in the Ukraine. The people apparently have the right, or certainly they're exercising their right, to bear arms. Again, making, although rudimentary, they're making Molotov cocktails and all that kind of stuff. The people, we have the unalienable right, the inherent right as human beings to be able to defend ourselves. We Americans have forgotten, it seems sometimes, those who want to put on gun control and those types of things. We have forgotten the reason that the Second Amendment and the First Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, all the first 10, were put in place is because we had lived under an oppressive regime, which was Britain at that time. And so the right to keep and bear arms is hardware, is lead, is the ability to defend ourselves and the other rights that we have in our Bill of Rights. And we're seeing that happen. So that's one thing that I would like to emphasize. I would also like to emphasize the extreme importance that Americans and the rest of the world community needs to exercise our other elements of national power. Military is to go in and be involved militarily is not what we want to do in the United States, but we and the European Union and other countries around the world can use their elements of national power and provide armaments for the Ukrainians so that they can fight their own war against the Russians.
What do you think that would send a message to the Chinese Communist government in terms of that?
Oh, there you go. I mean, that's a good observation, and I can appreciate where you are coming from with that. That is telling the Chinese government, don't you go dare try and attack Taiwan. That's clearly not acceptable. And if the world community doesn't stand up to the bully Russia, then the bully Xi would be encouraged, and the likelihood of an invasion against Taiwan would be high. On the other hand, if the world community shows, as it apparently is doing right now, that the acceptance of Russia's behavior is not okay, then I think Xi will recognize, okay, I better not do that. So basically, by saying no to Russia, we're saying no to China for any expansionism that they might have on Taiwan or anywhere else. And finally, naturally, these kinds of things are going to cause a humanitarian problem in the Ukraine. There are going to be people who are displaced because homes are being destroyed, industries being destroyed, their ability to produce and transport foodstuffs, to feed themselves and their families and those types of things are going to be disrupted and destroyed. So the world community needs to step up and make sure that the Ukrainians are supported, that there are, again, food, clothing, medical supplies, those types of things, especially, well, for everybody, but the non-combatants, the families, and that type of thing. Those types of things need to be provided for in this situation. And then again, on the Russian side, hopefully that they don't get any of that kind of support and they basically turn around and leave.
So now today, intelligence report proved that the Chinese Communist government requested Russia to delay the attack on the invasion of Ukraine after the Winter Olympics. That's according to the New York Times, saying that senior Chinese officials told senior Russian officials in early February not to invade Ukraine before the end of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. So, the Times said that the intelligence report indicated that senior Chinese officials had some levels of knowledge about Russia's plan to intentions to invade Ukraine before Russian President Putin launched the operation last week. So Reuters also confirmed with a source saying that the Chinese Communist government had made the request but declined to provide details. So obviously, but actually in last week when we reported from the CPAC, I interviewed one of the person whose name is Trevor Loudon. He is author and filmmaker who is also very familiar with the operations of socialism, communism, Marxism. At that time, he already pointed out that this effort by the Russian is orchestrated, between Russia and Communist China. So it's not surprising. And so what do you think? How do you think of Colonel John Mills and Lieutenant Colonel Young Mabry's analysis and observation? So leave your comments there. So let's see, I saw quite a few comments here. And Patrick saying that perhaps the Russian soldiers do not believe in this mission. And it's a perfect case study not allow Iran to ever get nukes. And so Audrey said that this war is corruption in the making. This doesn't smell right. There are other reasons for this war. So yeah, so Audrey, if you maybe just elaborate a little bit more, what do you mean about other reasons, so that our other audience could also look into that. And Patrick said, great interviews. Thank you. So, yeah, and we will, have more analysis on this war. Actually, I'm going to have an interview with Professor Hansen tomorrow, who is the expert in the military history in the Hoover Institution. So yeah, I look forward to hear from what Professor Hansen has to say about this war. So I'm sure you will be too. And I think we will probably share with you about Professor Hansen's perspective on our Friday's show. And so again, yeah, today is supposed to be the last day of YouTube's censorship on our channel. But really great that you are with us on this free speech platform, Safe Chat. So really glad and really appreciate that. So please share our video with more of your friends, your circles, so that more people will be able to know the truth. And so I hate CCP saying that how does this war play into the Great Reset? Yeah, I can ask this question to Professor Victor Hansen. That's right. If you have any questions or would like me to ask Professor Victor Hansen, please leave it in the comment area so that I will do my best to bring the question to him. Although my time with Professor Hansen's interview might be limited, but we'll do our best to get answers for you. So please leave the comments or the questions for Professor Hansen. And by the way, our second guest for today's show, Lieutenant Colonel Young Mabry, he is running for Arizona House of Representatives. I had a more in-depth interview with him on why he, step out to run for office. So I will share that with you in the near future. So, all right, I think this is for today. That's all for today, and look forward to another show on Friday. So in the meantime, please like in our show if you do think it's helpful to you, and also share the video. Okay, take care and have a great night. Bye-bye.